Hi everyone, my name is Chris Rogers. Honored to be here on the stage with Ron and our colleagues from Eon. Super exciting technology that you're going to learn more about a little bit later. My role at AWS is to lead a team of solutions architects in the storage space. So honored to lead a team of storage experts. So we're here today to talk to you about automated contextual, fully searchable backups. And as far as expectations for today's talk, we're going to be talking about data resiliency. Then Ron's going to come up and show you their approach, which is really quite amazing. New approach to an old problem, which is backing up your data, right? And so when you think about builders, you think about enterprises, they both want the same things. They want data resiliency. Builders want data resilient application components. Enterprises want easy, scalable applications that are protected, right? So let's talk about data protection. Start with this quote from Dr. Vogels. Just gave his keynote this morning. Maybe some of you had a chance to check that out. But he's famous for saying, everything fails all the time. Now, why does he say this? Is he a negative person? Does he not believe in the value of technology? Obviously not. He's the CTO of Amazon. But everything fails all the time is more of a caution. It's an advice to plan for data resiliency, to make sure that you're going to look at your stack, look at your application, look at your architecture, and make sure that you're planning for failures in places that might not typically be expected. So if you assume that everything fails all the time, you can plan for the worst, essentially hope for the best. So let's take a look at understanding your data risks. There's no doubt that everyone's data is growing. Does anybody have data that is shrinking in size? I don't think so, right? We all carry around, or within an arm's length on any given day, probably the most amazing data generators in cell phones or tablets, right? And devices that we carry with us, right? So everyone's data set is growing and growing very large, right? Even if it's not cell phones or smartphones or tablets, it's large devices. Certainly the advent of Gen AI is creating larger data sets that people want to train their models and things like that. So data is growing. Data has value. I think there are very few companies in the world today that would not say that data is their most critical asset, right? So data obviously has value, and therefore you need to secure it, you need to protect it, you need to govern access to that data. You need to provide permissions to who has access to your data. Make sure that that data is secure. I don't think that I'm telling you anything that you haven't heard before, but it sets the stage for Ron to come up a little later and talk about Eon's novel approach. But the problem remains the same, that data protection and resilience needs to be able to scale with an organization's data sets. So let's look at some of the things that we're protecting from today. There's an inordinate amount of bad actors out there, threat actors. There are an increasing number of vectors where attacks can stage, such that it's very hard for organizations to keep track of where the attacks are coming from, right? Data protection systems are very complex. Organizationally, they involve many teams throughout an organization. It's important to make sure you are staying up to date. You can't just implement a data protection scheme, a data protection plan, and just forget about it. It needs to be something that is ongoing. The actors out there, it's very newsworthy items that people hear about, companies that are in the news that get hit by ransomware attacks or malware attacks. There are some very organized cybercrime rings out there. It's no longer just a teenager with a computer in a basement. There's some very sophisticated organizations out there that are actually looking to get access to data. If you look at ransomware, malware, man-in-the-middle attacks, there's a slew that we can put on this slide. Some of these attacks have been around for years, and they're just getting repurposed. Some of these attacks are brand new with the latest and greatest technologies. Ransomware is a pervasive problem. The damage that ransomware does is very impactful to organizations. It requires maybe you have to restore servers. There have been studies where most of the time, 95.3% of the time, according to this slide, organizations don't even know where the attacks came from, how the initial threat came into their organization. If you think about supply chain businesses, If you do business with a smaller partner, oftentimes there could be a path of least resistance through some of those smaller organizations that maybe have weaker security standards in place. These are things that larger organizations need to think about, right? This is why it's critical to back up your data. In many cases, if you think, all right, well, I'll just pay the ransom, which could be very expensive, that's not always the best case either, because only 65% of the time does the data actually get restored when you pay the ransom. Right, so it's a very critical thing. Cybercrime is growing 15% a year. It is basically $10.5 trillion in the U.S. as of 2025. It's expected to be, that's how much it costs organizations. So it's a very critical problem. So what are we protecting against tomorrow? Right, with the advent of technologies like AI, ML, and Gen AI, those are exciting technologies that increase productivity, that are transforming businesses. But they're also aiding the threat actors out there, making it easier for them to harvest data. Data harvesting. The threat actors and the malicious, those of malicious intent, are harvesting the data in new and different ways. They're taking the data over the air, whether it be a Wi-Fi network or from a network. Quantum computing. Think of the advent of quantum computing, which is becoming more and more of a discussion point. There's a lot of research, exciting research, that Amazon and other companies are doing around quantum computing. At the advent of quantum computing, that has the ability to effectively render current encryption standards obsolete overnight. Right? So there's new threats, there's new risks, there's new challenges that are around the corner as we look at what we're protecting from tomorrow. And that's where Eon comes into play with a new approach to the backup challenge. Talked about AI, ML, and Gen AI. Those make it easier for threat actors to gather data more quickly. You need less knowledge of the data set. You get a component of data, whether it be a file or a pile of data that you've acquired. AI, Gen AI, can actually make it easier to sift through that data and find critical information. And then dependency mapping, right? Understanding in your organization where application dependencies are, system dependencies are, is important because threat actors are going after that data, trying to infiltrate at various points in the process, whether it be in your application stack or whether it be in various parts of your system. And so it moves to the AWS shared responsibility model. Because what Ron's going to be talking about is their approach, their scalable approach to backups and how they're using the cloud to do that. So it's important to kind of leave you with a reminder about the AWS shared responsibility model, which essentially says that it's an agreement between AWS and our customers, that AWS is responsible for the resilience of the cloud, and customers are responsible for resilience in the cloud. So you can see the yellow and blue lines there, that AWS takes care of the hardware, the services, the compute, the storage, the database, the networking, so forth. Whereas the customer is responsible for their own infrastructure that they build on top of AWS using those resources, right? So there's an agreement there where customers are responsible for the workload architecture, the continuous testing, management, change management, things like this, all right? And this is an important part of a data protection plan. All right, so with that, I will have Ron come back up here to talk about Eon's approach and go through a demo. There you go, Ron. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges of cloud infrastructure backup. And many of you might think that, hey, isn't backup already solved? We've been backing up data forever. So let's go back in time. For a few years back, when many enterprises were still running their workloads on-prem. And in the on-prem world, you had usually the centralized IT team and many application teams that are running the different services of each enterprise. And that centralized IT team would provision resources for the application teams. So they would go into the server room, see that all the fans are green, no one broke into the door, all the lights are green, fans are working, everything is great. If an app team would want a resource, they would cut a ticket to the IT team. They would provision compute, storage, wrap it as a VM, hand it over to that app team, and they knew what they had control. Fast forward, and today those enterprises have started using the cloud. and are extremely, mainly using the cloud for their production workloads. So now, the cloud is a completely different story. In the cloud, we have this cloud operations team, still the same model. It's a centralized team that is responsible for data resiliency. And there's those application teams. But now, application teams can just spin up resources, launch VMs, databases, manage services, and so on. But let me tell you a secret, and please keep that here in the room. The cloud is just someone else's computer. The bits are on the cloud, over the internet, and now good luck associating your precious document to the physical drive that it is on. So governing and controlling assets in the cloud is a real challenge today, and we're seeing enterprises struggle with that. Circling back to that shared responsibility model, AWS provides the best-in-class storage, compute, AI, databases, and so on. But the application, that's the responsibility of customers, and that's where we step in. So let's talk about the actual challenges that we've seen. And the first one is that cloud resource sprawl. And I'll start with a story. So before co-founding Eon, I worked for AWS. I was the general manager for the migration and disaster recovery services. And we've seen customers struggle with backup and data resiliency as they move into the cloud. So a very large health and hospitality enterprise just talked to me after their migration. And their director of cloud operations told me that they've been trying to apply their backup policies over their cloud infrastructure for 3 months and simply couldn't do it. So I thought to myself, well, this is probably going to be a very complex requirement if they take them 3 months and they can't do it. But it was an extremely simple requirement. All they wanted is to back up their production workloads that have customer data or PII, personal identifiable information, for 90 days, meaning store those daily snapshots for 90 days. Their production workloads that do not have any customer data or PII for 45 days, and all the rest, all of the non-production workloads, for 14 days. But they've just migrated 10,000 VMs into the cloud, into EC2, and that team had no idea what's running where, with so many application teams. And all of the existing solutions, based on the shared responsibility model, including the legacy backup solutions and everything out there, required them to manually tag each individual resource and tell the backup software to know where the data is, where the production workloads are running, and how to back up each individual resource. And whenever they thought that they got it right, an application team would spin up a new application or modernize. There's so many great services at AWS. And when we ran the migration service, we've seen customers moving into the cloud and then modernizing. So for example, a Postgre database running on an EC2, moving to an RDS, all of those tags just got lost. And they couldn't keep up with the backup posture. So you want to guess what they did? They put 90 days on everything, paying millions of dollars a year for storage in the form of snapshots that they simply don't need. And that did make sense. AWS would, and us as partners, would want customer to get value for their spend so they can route these spends into cool AI tools and new value for their company and not for storage that they don't need. And then comes the regulated industries. They can't do that. They can't over-back up their data because, as Chris said, data is an asset, but data can also be a liability. So insurance companies, healthcare and life sciences, financial institutions, they can't or they won't store the data for more than what they have to. So they have teams that are tagging resources all day long. So that's problem number one. The second problem is just keeping up with the cloud backup posture. So what does that mean? Customers are eventually left with one knob. Turn that knob to one side, increase the daily retention for everything because you can't manage the resources, and inflate your storage cost, potentially have liability of data that you don't need. Or, on the other end, turn that single knob to the other side, shorten the retention, and take risk. Risk that you are under backing up your data and that you won't be able to recover it on game day. And then comes recovery and restoration. And this week, we've met with so many customers that really liked our platform. And one of them told me something that really caught my eye. And he said, well, my backups so far have been useless insurance policies. I've been paying for storage for years, and I couldn't use it. So those snapshots today are not searchable. You can't query them. You can't access the data. And that's what we've come here to change. So I'll give you another story. I was talking to an insurance company, one of the largest, a large insurance company that are heavily using AWS. Now we're talking about millions of cloud resources, thousands of subnets, really huge infrastructure. And they had an auditor comes in, and that auditor wanted them to prove that they're backing up their insurance claims. And he asked them, hey, please provide the insurance claim of John Doe from 3 years ago. Now, that's not in the production anymore. So they went to the backup, like they did in their on-prem days. And now the process was absurd. First of all, they found out that the person who managed backup 2 years ago is no longer an employee in the company. And they had no idea where the data is. So they opened up the snapshots, and they've seen millions of snapshots in their console. And again, it's up to the customer to know what's in there. Zero search capabilities today. So they raised a SWAT team trying to find out who was there, looking for tribal knowledge of what happened 3 years ago and where did we back up our data. And they've ended up finding something in their records, and it took them about a week to find the right snapshot. They crossed their fingers, and they found out that the snapshot is there. And now starts the recovery process. So it's an all-or-nothing restoration. It's a snapshot of a VM that was running a Postgres database. All the customer wanted is to run a simple SQL query on the database, select star from claims, and that's it. But they had to restore the entire thing. And that was a VM that they had 3 years back. So obviously, security locked it down immediately because it had a lot of security vulnerabilities on it. They had to call in the security team. A week later, they patched it, only to find out an end-of-life database, an end-of-life Postgres. So they called in the DBAs. The DBA comes a week later, upgrades the Postgres, sets up networking, compute, resets the password. Finally, the day arrived 3 weeks later, they've managed to run the SQL query, only to find out that it's not the table that they were after. So they had to do it again. So 6 weeks to get your data that you've been paying for out of that storage for years. And that is something that obviously we at Eon decided to fix. So backup is not solved, definitely not in the cloud, until we came in, and let's talk about Eon and our new great platform. So at Eon, we've decided to tackle these 2 huge pain points that we've seen customer facing. So first of all, let's talk about implementation. One of the challenges and the reason that customers are spending so much time just configuring their backup solutions is because that a lot of those legacy solutions today came from the on-prem paradigm. They have appliances that turned into virtual appliances, and they need to install agents in different subnets and so on. So Eon comes in a very cloud-born way, read-only APIs, scans the customer's environment. And then we do continuous resource mapping. So we'll identify what data is installed on each cloud resource, whether there are PII in it, financial information, patient health records, and stuff like that. We'll also automatically identify what's running in production versus non-production, and which applications are installed on VMs, which we see customers struggle with just identifying that after they move to the cloud. So now the reason that we're doing all of that is that now you can apply very simple backup policies that are contextual. So let's circle back to that customer. With Eon, you can define those 3 simple rules. Back up my production workloads with PII for 90 days, my production workloads without PII for 45 days, and the non-production workloads for 14 days, and they're done. Now, when an application team spins up a new resource, no problem. Eon will detect if it has PII, if it's running in production, and will apply the appropriate backup policy. If the data changes and someone starts writing PII to an existing resource, we'll automatically identify that and apply the appropriate backup policy. Or if the infrastructure change and we modernize, you move data from an EC2 instance to an RDS or a DynamoDB or all of the greatest and latest services that AWS provides, still, we'll identify that it's running in production, the data that you have in it, and we'll apply the appropriate backup policy. And now, let's get to the really cool part, and that's our storage tier. So as we've mentioned, customers today are mostly relying on snapshots. So these are either EBS snapshots, RDS snapshots, or other data store snapshots, S3 versioning, and so on. And the challenges there is that they can't restore granularly. They can't use it, but they are paying for the storage. So with Eon, we've built a completely novel storage tier. Still sits on S3. That's the only storage tier that provides the sufficient data durability for backups. But the format is queryable. Still object lock, still immutable. You can't delete snapshots. You can't update them, but you can read them. So now you can run a simple SQL query directly on the backups. You can search across all of your backups for files, for database tables, and restore granularly whatever you need. So now let's see the platform. All right, so I'm going to show you the platform, and I hope that all of you are sitting down because this is going to be exciting. All right. So this is the Eon console. And at first, you get that view of resources from multiple cloud providers, all of the various resource types across all regions. So you get a single pane of glass of your cloud inventory. But not only do we show you your metadata from the cloud, we also show you what you have inside. So for example, you can see if you have personal identifiable information, PII, in a resource. If you have financial information in that, whether it's running in production or not, and which applications are on each VM, or EC2 instance, et cetera. And if I'll zoom in, I can go further and actually see examples of where did the system found financial information or PII and what types. And the reason that we're doing that is that now you can see that that resource is protected. Let's see why. I'll go into the backup policies tab, and here you can see that you, the customer, have defined your requirements based on your business or compliance needs. And I've defined that everything in production that has PII or financial information, in this example, will get a daily snapshot for 3 months to one region, and a monthly for a year in another. We can do it to a different cloud provider. We can do it across regions and so on. And that's it. Now, again, new resources, we're continuously scanning the environment. So if the data changes, the backup policy applies. And we'll see how we monitor that as well, and dashboards and so on. We can also go into the application layer. So this is a very cool example where you can see that we have, and this is a common request from customers. I want my production databases to be backed up in a specific way. So here you can see a cool example where everything that's running in prod and either runs on RDS or EC2s with specific applications, specific databases. MongoDB, Postgres, MySQL in this example, will get a specific backup policy. And that helps customers that are modernizing and want to be agnostic to the infrastructure when they back up their data. So as simple as that, that solves this huge problem of backup management, and that's what where we introduce the backup posture management, the first platform of cloud backup posture management that simplifies managing backup policies across the cloud. And now let's show you how we recover and restore the data. So we can obviously restore the entire thing. Can go into the Eon Snapshot tab, go back, select any point in time, and restore an entire EBS volume, an RDS instance, an EC2 instance, S3 bucket, or whatnot. I can select the target account on the fly, the region, the AZ, depending on the resource. So data restoration is completely flexible. But as we said, most of the time, I'm not after the snapshot. I just want the data. And for that, and I might not even know where it is. And for that, we've designed a global search mechanism across both files and database tables. So let's search for files first. I'll search for a report, and that runs a search across all of my backups, whether they came from S3, object storage, file storage, whatever cloud provider you're using, and so on. Obviously, I can zoom in further and filter that list. But here, if I click on a file and zoom in, I have a full file explorer that is directly on my backups. I haven't restored anything yet, and I can navigate on that as if it was live. From here, I can select any point in time based on my backup policy, of course, and the retention period, and restore, just plug that file. So if I need that report, just get the file, as simple as that. But now I'll show you what's even cooler, and that's databases, which is the biggest pain point. Because here we've seen customers that said, hey, we used to have something similar back on-prem. We had our file servers, and our backup solutions would allow us to granularly restore files. Some of them would have some search capabilities, and we lost it when we got to the cloud. So there was a regression where customers moved to the cloud, they lost that capability, so we brought it back. But now I'm going to show you something that never existed, not on-prem and not in cloud. That's when I want to search tables. So let's go back to that insurance claim example. It took them 6 weeks to get that compliance audit, to get that insurance claim. I'll show you how we're doing it in 6 minutes, or even 6 seconds if I want. So let's go on and search for an insurance claim. I'll hit that, and instantly we get all of the tables across all of my backups, regardless if they were originated. A lot of details on them. So they might have originated on an EC2 instance running in Postgres, or a managed RDS running in MySQL, or NoSQL database. I'll show you that as well. So I get a lot of context just from here. And if you recall, in that story that I shared, they've done a full restoration process that was tedious and took them 3 weeks just to figure out that it's not the table they were after. So for that, we just added a quick preview. So we preview the top rows before I've restored anything, just so I can get a sense of the data. Maybe it's not what I'm after. We're classifying each individual column so we can mask sensitive data. And let's assume that this is not what I'm after. This is not the table. So now, 6 seconds instead of 3 weeks. And let's say that I'll preview this one, and oh, yeah, this is the one, claims. I want this table. So I'll go into our database explorer. And this is the first of its kind. It's a database explorer that runs directly on top of your backups. Just query the backups without provisioning any compute, any networking, without restoring any snapshots. Can select any point in time. Let's go back to November, select that point in time. And now the schema locked to that point in time. And from here, I can just run my SQL query. Autocomplete is contextual to that specific point in time. We'll talk about access control. That's also contextual to each point in time. So let's just select star from my claims table. For the sake of the demo, we'll limit the results and hit run query. And this is the first time where we actually go and pull data from the backups. And within seconds, you get your data. And we've run experiments with hundreds of millions of rows, complex joins, anywhere between 2 to 5 seconds. And you're done. You can have the results go into an S3 bucket in your restoration account. You can restore it to a live database if you want a full table, or you can just get the data. And when we show this to customers, they usually say, whoa, So are you actually telling me that I got used to paying for storage anywhere between 10 and 30% of my cloud bill on backup, which is the storage and the management layer, and I couldn't use it. And again, backups are still immutable, air-gapped, object-locked, secure. So you can't delete or update them, but you can use them, you can read them. So we decided to make those backups useful. And then we see other stakeholders in the enterprise come in. Said, hey, now the analytics teams are starting to look into it because the storage is there. Why not mine it, use it? And I'll show you what we're doing with the unstructured data as well, and with the NoSQL databases. And on the backup tier, you can simply join collections that came from a MongoDB with an Excel file that originated on S3 and a table that came from Postgres on a single unified backup platform. So this is usually where I would drop the mic, but I attached it to my shirt. So instead, I'm going to show you what we're doing with NoSQL databases. So let's go on and search for a movie. We see media. Enterprises love that. So once again, on this example, the data originated in Mongo. This one is in Mongo Atlas, their cloud solution. One is self-hosted on EC2. All of the same capabilities, and I can also zoom in to the same database explorer. I'll select my point in time. Once again, that schema, which of course is originated from an unstructured data. So we've identified, because we scan the data and we read it in order to back it up, we've identified how the schema would have looked like if it was a structured database. And I can run SQL queries on top of my MongoDB as well. Let's, again, limit the results and run the query. So now I got back the data from Mongo in the JSON format. We do the best effort to normalize it as well, so you can also flatten it to a tabular format and use the data. So now I can take my data and cross-reference it with data that came from relational databases, and that's huge. So now when I show this to customers, they get really excited. They say, okay, but we have our backup tools. You've got this backup posture thing that really solves all the management and that storage tier. So let's see our dashboard. And in the dashboard, we have a lot of visuals that help you to monitor and control your backup. We can integrate with your SNS, Slack, or whatnot if you need to loop into specific events. But I just wanted to show you this really unique visual of the drift protection. So as you recall, you can define contextual backup policies that are not relying on tags, not relying on manual tagging. We can use your tags, obviously, if you opt to do that, but you don't have to. But now if the data changes and something changes and the backup policy identifies that some resource has the data changed and it requires a different backup policy, you can get that in that visual, you can get a notification in Slack, you can have an approval flow that will adjust the backup policies. All right, so we've seen the platform, and we've done so much innovation. And just this week, we've had a very large customer that has been doing really big financial services institution that has been working on backups in the cloud for a very long time. Once again, hundreds of thousands of resources in the cloud. And he told us at the beginning of the meeting, well, I know all the existing solutions. What is there to innovate in backup? And 30 minutes in, he told us, well, F it, you've reinvented backup. So I think that that's what we've done. And then comes the next question. All right, so how much does that going to cost me? How much more do I need to pay? Because this is by far a superior solution to anything out there. And then it gets even cooler. This is a self-funding project. So our billing goes to the marketplace. You only pay for the storage of the backup. If there's one thing that we've learned in our years at Amazon is work backwards from the customer, and meet customers where they are. So no hidden fees. We don't charge for restoration at all. We believe that you're paying for that storage. It's yours to use as much as you want. And the bill is just per giga per month for the storage. But here comes the even better part. The list price is even lower. We've redesigned the entire storage layer with very smart compression, deduplication, and incremental backups that are designed into the cloud. We have dozens of patents in storage management and data management in the cloud. And that allows us to give you all of these benefits with a smaller footprint on your backups and a lower list price. So then he asked us, OK, so what's the trade-off? And to be honest, we're still searching. We haven't found one. So let's talk a little bit about how does it actually work. So I'll show you the architecture a little bit. You can see over here on the left side that you have your source account. That's your AWS account. Eon will either provision a scanning account and a vault account for the backups for customers, or customers can use their own. But as a best practice, we always separate the backup accounts from the production accounts to minimize disruption on production and also to minimize risk on the backups. And we do see that more customers opt for us to provision those backup accounts for them because of all of those ransomware concerns that Chris mentioned, and the concern that if a malicious actor will be able to encrypt the production workloads, they might get access to the backups. We can also do that, again, across cloud. So in that single tenant account, everything runs. Your customer's data doesn't go to Eon control planes, file names, none of that. No PII goes to the Eon control plane. Everything runs in your own account. Eon will classify the data, index everything, and incrementally back up all of your resources in a unified air-gap secure vault, again, stored on top of S3 and object lock. And from here, you can restore to wherever you want, whenever you want. So you can restore the data into the same account in your production or to a sandbox account. And we always had this say that you only know if a backup succeeded when you try to restore. So we want to allow customers to restore the data as much as they want and test and just have the ability to use their data. So now I want to invite you to come to our booth. We have a very, very exciting booth. So after the talk, I encourage you to run to the Venetian, to the booth. Or to be more realistic, we're working in tech, so you probably take the bus, but still, I do recommend you to go to the booth. We're still open. We have a really cool experience of time travel in the booth, and we got really great feedback on that. And our team will be able to give you a personal demo and answer any questions you might have. So booth 1576, it's big, you'll see it. And you're also more than welcome to connect with either myself or my co-founders. Ophir Ehrlich is our CEO, and Gonen Stein, our CRO. You can, if you want to schedule a demo with us, just scan the QR code, and we'll be more than happy. And to summarize, backup in the cloud have been stale for a long time. You don't see too many exciting startups in that field, and we haven't seen them for a very long time. But the budget is huge, the pains are real, and we've came to change that. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I think that we can invite Chris back and let you have some Q&A, and if you have some questions, we'll be more than happy to answer.